As film prices continue to rise in the recent years, I've looked into ways to streamline the entire process and save money along the way. While, because of the industry, there isn't a ton of wiggle room, there are definitely some tips and tricks you can apply to your own workflow to help save you some money on a weekly basis. These tips will be especially helpful when applied long term and will have kind of a minimal effect if just taken advantage of on a short-term basis. You're also going to want to make sure you stay until the end, as the last tip is probably my favorite and potentially the most impactful of them all. With that being said, first up is bulk loading your own film. In theory, this is a really simple process, but my roommate learned firsthand that doing it well consistently can be really tricky. Instead of purchasing pre-loaded film canisters, you buy empty ones and you buy a bulk roll of unexposed film, and then in your darkroom you manually load it, cutting down the cost pretty considerably at the cost of your own manual labor. Now, this is easier to do on 35mm compared to 120 film, but definitely can be achieved on either. You will need some specific tools and will obviously need to purchase a bulk sheet of film for this, but in the long run will end up being considerably cheaper. My roommate Johnny did this with his black and white film for a handful of months and had some good success with it, but he found with the quickness he was trying to bulk load at, he was getting some light leaks and deemed it not worth it in his case to continue. That being said, there's a ton of videos on YouTube alone explaining their process and plenty of success stories with bulk loading their own film, and I'll make sure to throw some of those in the description below. Next up, developing and scanning your own film. Similar to bulk loading, this one will take some initial investment for the needed gear, but over time, especially the longer you do it yourself, you will make your money back in savings. That being said, I think you'll have to do some reverse math to see if you shoot enough to really justify your savings with either of these, at least in the short term. But if you're serious enough about shooting film or even shooting multiple boxes a year, then I think it's well worth it. You can get an entry-level develop and scan setup for around $300 to $400, including scanner, chemicals, etc. But again, you'll be trading some time for your manual labor instead of the labs. But once you get a workflow down, you could do it batched pretty easily. With this setup, you'll only need to be paying for the rolls of film themselves and then chemicals every once in a while saving the $10 to $15 each roll for develop and scan. Over the course of a year or years or hundreds of rolls, the impact of this will undoubtedly be felt. Third is purchasing expired film. This one is a bit trickier than the first two, as shooting expired film is an art form in and of itself, in my opinion. Depending on the state of the roll and how old it is, you'll have to over or underexpose by a certain amount to get the colors and exposure to render correctly. I don't have too much experience with this, but I do know a handful of photographers who have shot expired rolls and they've turned out great. On top of that, you may be able to snag a bulk package of expired rolls of film from eBay or your local store if you look hard enough, saving you from the current inflated film prices of 2022. Next is upgrading to a more trustworthy camera. This one may or may not be applicable to some of you, but when I was shooting my cheap XA2, the amount of missed focus or poorly exposed frames was alarming for a supposedly perfectly working well camera. Many old film cameras have poorly working vintage technology like early autofocus or auto exposure that doesn't work all that well. Because of this, every roll you get back will have a handful of shots that are total duds because of the camera just straight up basically malfunctioning. By upgrading to a more consistent camera, you won't be missing shots and in return wasting frames and money each time you pull out the camera. Not saying you have to jump into an expensive premium camera, but upgrading your dad's hand-me-down SLR or your thrifted film camera might not be a bad idea to help save you some precious frames and money. Fifth is doing more test shots with your digital camera or phone. I'm guilty of seeing what I think is initially a good shot and firing away on my 35mm only to get the film back and be underwhelmed with the shot. I think this could be easily remedied by taking more digital shots on your phone, or at the very least taking more time to really eye up each composition to make sure that the shot truly is indeed worth it. Simply checking with your phone could potentially save you frames for shots that truly are worthwhile or meaningful and not just the excitement of the moment. This mindset came especially apparent to me when I switched to shooting mostly medium format, as each frame gets quite a bit more expensive. So I would take my time more and shoot more photos through my iPhone camera to double down on the photos, ensuring that each one was worth it. Next up, purchasing a half frame camera. With most people using film cameras today solely to post on social media or smaller web-based projects, switching to a half frame camera could be a no-brainer. Instead of using each full frame of a, say, 36 exposure film, the half frame cameras shoot only, well, half a frame. So on a 36 exposure roll, you would shoot 72 photos, which doubles the roll, hence the half frame. While yes, the image size will be smaller, it technically shouldn't matter that much because in this case, all of the work being created is made mostly for the digital landscape, so that extra resolution being seen especially on your phone won't even be apparent. Now, obviously, you'll be buying film half as much if you keep the same rate that you shoot, which will dramatically save you money at the film store. I'll also throw in some reviews from some different channels in the description that have reviewed some actually really good half frame cameras in the past. Last but certainly not least, switching your film stocks to more budget friendly ones. Okay, while this one may seem somewhat obvious, I think it does go over a lot of people's heads. For example, a roll of 35mm Kodak Portra 400 is roughly $20 per roll or $60 a box on average, whereas Kodak Ultramax 400, which has the same light sensitivity but slightly less dynamic range, is $20 for 3 rolls. Now, I am a sucker for Portra. Hell, even my license plate says Portra. But with that being said, the difference in color rendering isn't always worth that potential 3 times price point. Additionally, you can find black and white rolls for even cheaper if you're willing to part ways with color film temporarily. Kodak has even brought back Kodak Gold 200 for 120 film, so obviously there's an interest and merit in these budget film stocks. With the price of things nowadays, you might as well give it a shot. What have you got to lose? When I shot with my Olympus OM10 a lot more, I would always get Kodak Gold 200 on 35mm, and the color rendering always turned out really great. So truthfully, I've got nothing negative to say about any of these more budget-friendly film stocks.